Welcome to today's Explainer. Go ahead and settle in. So, today we're taking a calm, measured look at a really foundational concept within Active Directory Domain Services, or ADDS. We're going to examine what's often considered the silent engine of the whole system, the global catalog. It's a component that quietly carries half the weight of Active Directory, yet it frequently remains misunderstood. Well, at least until something breaks. Our syllabus for today's session is pretty straightforward. First, the missing piece. Second, defining the catalog. Third, the partial attribute set. Fourth, 2 core use cases. And finally, placement guidance. We're going to methodically demystify this critical component so you're fully prepared, whether you're studying for your AZ800 exam or managing a live production environment.
All right, let's dive into Section 1, the missing piece, authentication stalls.
Consider this scenario, a situation that actually trips up a lot of administrators. A user attempts to sign in on a busy Monday morning, but the authentication simply hangs. It stalls. You verify the details. Their password? Perfectly correct. The network? Fully operational. The local domain controller is completely reachable and responding. So, what exactly is the missing piece here? Why can't the user access their workstation? Well, in many cases, the answer traces directly back to the availability of the global catalog. Keep this scenario in the back of your mind. We'll return to it, and you'll soon understand exactly why this stall happens.
Moving on to Section 2, defining the catalog, forest-wide visibility.
So, what is it? A global catalog is a partial, read-only, searchable copy of every object in your entire Active Directory forest. Now, every single word in this sentence matters. It's essentially a foundational law of computer science in Windows environments. Let's deliberately break it down. Partial, that means it doesn't contain everything. It's a carefully selected subset of data. Read-only, meaning you cannot edit or write objects directly through it. It's purely for referencing data. Searchable, meaning it's highly optimized for you to query it quickly. And forest-wide, this one is absolutely crucial. It means this database sees across all domain boundaries, not just the single domain where the server resides.
To truly grasp the value here, we really need to contrast it with a standard domain controller. Within a single domain, every writable domain controller holds the full Active Directory database for that specific domain. It has every attribute of every user, group, and computer within its boundary. If you query it for a user named Jane at contoso.com and Jane lives in that local domain, you get an instant answer. But here's the limitation. That standard domain controller only holds data for its own domain. Suppose your forest has 3 domains, corp.contoso.com, sales.contoso.com, and eu.contoso.com. A standard domain controller in the corp domain has absolutely zero visibility into the sales or EU domains. If Jane actually lives over in the sales domain, your query to the corp domain controller comes back completely empty. And this is exactly the gap the global catalog fills. A domain controller that is also a global catalog server holds its full local domain database plus a partial copy of every other domain in the forest. It gives you that much-needed forest-wide visibility.
Which brings us to Section 3, the partial attribute set. What gets replicated?
As we just mentioned, the global catalog doesn't store every single attribute of every object. Instead, it holds only a specific subset of attributes. These are the attributes that are most likely to be used when users or systems perform cross-domain searches. These carefully chosen attributes include highly searched properties like givenName, displayName, and mail. Now, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you need to add an attribute to this forest-wide copy, say a custom employee ID number, you can absolutely change which attributes are replicated. However, you must do this by modifying the Active Directory schema. I really want to enunciate this clearly. Modifying the schema is a permanent, forest-wide architectural change. It's an operation that should always be planned methodically and, frankly, never taken lightly.
So, what's the logic behind this design? Well, it's purely about efficiency. Why is it only a partial copy? Because storing the complete exhaustive database of every single domain on every global catalog server would just be enormous. It would consume vast amounts of storage and generate massive replication traffic. Furthermore, most of that deep, granular data would never actually be used in a standard cross-domain search anyway. By holding only a subset of data, the global catalog remains fast, efficient, and very lightweight.
Let's look at Section 4, 2 core use cases, mail and authentication. The first primary use case involves multi-domain searches. Let's slowly walk through how this functions, using an email system as our example. Step 1. An Exchange server receives an inbound email message. Step 2.
Before Exchange can deliver that message, it needs to figure out exactly where the recipient's mailbox is located. In a multi-domain forest, the Exchange server itself has no idea which specific domain the recipient lives in, so it automatically queries the global catalog. Step 3. The global catalog, utilizing that partial searchable forest-wide copy we just discussed, instantly locates the recipient regardless of their domain. In Step 4, armed with this location data, the mail is routed successfully. Without a reachable global catalog, this entire process breaks down and mail flow simply stops.
The second core use case quietly affects every user every single day. This is the authentication process, and it directly answers our question from the very beginning of the explainer. When a user authenticates, Step 1 occurs. They reach out to their local domain controller. Step 2, the domain controller must build a sign-in token, and to do so, it is strictly required to check that user's universal group memberships. Because universal groups can span the entire forest, the local domain controller's standard database just isn't sufficient on its own. Step 3, the authenticating domain controller must contact a global catalog to look up those universal group memberships. If no global catalog is reachable at that exact moment, the domain controller cannot finish issuing the sign-in token. The authentication stalls. This is precisely why your user's Monday morning sign-in hung, despite having the correct password and perfect network connectivity. The global catalog was the missing piece.
Finally, Section 5, Placement Guidance. Where do we put the GC? If you're operating a single domain forest, the recommendation is absolute. Configure every single domain controller as a global catalog. There is zero risk or downside. Because there are no other domains to replicate data from, the overhead of carrying a partial copy of other domains simply doesn't exist. Every server becomes fully capable of handling any query or sign-in independently. However, in a multi-domain or multi-site forest, the guidance is slightly more nuanced. The default recommendation is still to place it on every domain controller. But if you have heavily constrained wide area network or WAN links, you might choose to limit placement to reduce the replication traffic. Remember, every global catalog must receive updates from every other domain. But consider the risk involved here. If you limit placement and your WAN link drops, the local site can no longer reach a global catalog. Authentication stalls, mail flow breaks.
Therefore, we arrive at the official definitive guidance from Microsoft. Unless you have a very strong, highly specific reason to reduce WAN replication traffic, you should configure every domain controller as a global catalog. In modern networking environments with reasonable bandwidth, the overhead of replicating that partial attribute set is almost always a much smaller cost than the performance hit and the availability risk of not having a local global catalog at every physical site. The scenarios where you genuinely benefit from limiting global catalog placement are, frankly, quite uncommon today.
So, we've covered what the global catalog is, why it loads a schema-defined subset of attributes, its crucial role in cross-domain queries and universal group membership lookups, and how to strategically place it across your infrastructure. I'll leave you with this provocative thought to consider regarding your own production environment. If your local site's WAN link were to go down right now, at this very moment, does a local global catalog exist to keep your users successfully signing in and your mail continuously flowing? Take the time to evaluate your architecture, master this concept, and you'll be fully prepared for both the AZ 800 exam and the realities of enterprise IT. Thanks for joining today's explainer.